What's up? This is the Other Map, and in this video we're going to be talking about the East Asian city of Hong Kong. If you're in the West, there's a simple question that comes into play as far as current events in Hong Kong. Why should I care? Well, I'm going to try and answer that question here. There's some cities that are just special. New Orleans is one such city with its hybrid post-colonial culture and huge contributions to world music, not to mention its unique food and the architecture in the French Quarter. And then there's Mardi Gras. It's just a magical place, although sadly I personally have never been. I have, however, been to Hong Kong, and it's nuts. Also a former colonial possession, Hong Kong was long an island of capitalism right within communist China, making the city a riddle in physical form. Its contributions to global film culture have been huge, the food is great, and the architecture is unique. Not to mention that Hong Kong is mostly nature and sits on a chain of islands too, making for a stunning natural setting. It's also one of Asia's art hubs, on par with Tokyo and Singapore, and has a vibe that would be hard to find, well, anywhere else. To provide a brief historical background, Hong Kong was more or less uninhabited rock when the British stole it during the Opium Wars. In short, most of the Opium Wars occurred in the 1840s, where Britain fought China, twice, for the right to get its citizens hooked on hard drugs, which, if you were wondering, is just disgusting. After winning both wars, by 1860 the British fully controlled Hong Kong Island and Kowloon, today the two most urban parts of the city. In 1898, via another underhanded maneuver, Britain leased a chunk of adjacent rural land, now known as the New Territories, for 99 years, a lease that would come up in 1997. However, in 1985 it was decided that the UK would hand all of Hong Kong back to China in 1997, mostly because China wanted it, and the decline of the British Empire meant the colony wasn't militarily defensible. That said, the British influence isn't fully going anywhere. Hong Kong still drives on the left and has double-decker buses, for example. Hong Kong was never fully a part of England either, and similarly hasn't technically been fully absorbed by China. In both situations, it has had a political status like that of Puerto Rico in the United States. Hong Kong is seeing a lot of struggle these days as Xi Jinping's China asserts control of it, with democratic capitalism being dismantled, and much of Hong Kong has straight up fled to cities in the West, such as London and Vancouver, as well as more capitalist Asian countries like Singapore and Taiwan. However, relations with communist China have always defined Hong Kong. The city was more or less your average colony until 1949, the year the communists declared victory after a huge civil war in China. Many Shanghai businesses moved their operations to Hong Kong, including the Shanghai textile and film industries. Also crossing the border was a huge influx of Chinese refugees fleeing the communists that now needed jobs. For this and other reasons, the city would become a manufacturing center for decades, which contributed to Hong Kong's economy, although that isn't what made it the city it is today. Due to age-old cross-border connections, communist China would trade with Hong Kong, and no one else. However, British Hong Kong was capitalism incarnate and would trade with anyone that was remotely interested. This situation made Hong Kong the middleman between its giant neighbor and the world. This is a huge part of why Hong Kong became the extremely wealthy financial capital it was from roughly 1949 to the 2010s. We made a video on all this, and I'll put a link to that in the description. Hong Kong was so wealthy that, in 1997, when shady financial groups were crashing stock markets all over Asia, the Hong Kong government bought enough shares in its own stock market to protect it from a crash, and emerged relatively unscathed compared to other Asian economies. If you know anything about markets, well, that's insane. Anyone want to make a movie about these events? I mean, after The Wolf of Wall Street and The Big Short, there'd be an audience. On the note of movies, Hong Kong's prosperity is doubtlessly why its homegrown film industry boomed. Hong Kong was the world's major exporter of kung fu flicks, such as those starring Bruce Lee, and later spread the influence of directors like John Woo and Wong Kar-wai, as well as making the careers of actors like Jackie Chan and Michelle Yeoh. In addition, the Hong Kong movie Infernal Affairs was remixed by Martin Scorsese and set in Boston for the Oscar-winning remake The Departed. Even though its output was impressive in both quantity and quality, the Hong Kong film industry wasn't really palatable, with gangs known as triads controlling production companies and using films to launder money. At the height of their power, the triads basically ran Hong Kong. and additionally influenced the criminal underground of Chinese populations overseas. But those are just the basics. People familiar with Hong Kong definitely know about its relationship with Communist China, its long dominant stock market, its movie industry, and the organized crime embedded in the city. But Hong Kong is much, much more interesting than that, and has a number of things that make it and its history completely unique. An obvious one would be the city's notorious Kowloon walled city, a sort of skyscraper favela that was demolished in 1993. You can find a link to our video on that topic in the description. But during Hong Kong's golden years, you also had a massive floating population in the harbor, a foreigner-heavy suburb within a city named Discovery Bay, and lesser-visited, rural-ish islands like Lantau and Lama, which still have their own unique vibes. You could spend weeks exploring the city without seeing half of what the place had to offer, even with the help of its stellar public transportation systems. I wouldn't go now, but it was heavy vacation material. I was there for 3 days and fell in love with the place. Hong Kong's restaurant and nightlife scenes are legendary, even if their engine is sort of messed up. Because of an artificially restricted housing supply, Hong Kongers mostly live in impossibly cramped apartments, usually with minimal kitchen facilities. Because of this, people mostly eat and hang out in public, which means the city has an unusually vibrant street scene and crazy people watching. In addition, Hong Kong apartment towers are huge. So many people live in them that it only takes 2 or 3 buildings to support a convenience store, and those stores are everywhere. I found a single street corner in the city from which I could see 3 7-Elevens. While the food is decidedly East meets West, Hong Kongers definitely love their Chinese tea. The demand in 1970s Hong Kong for an expensive fermented type of tea named pu'er would in itself result in a major innovation in the ancient world of Chinese tea. Chinese researchers traveled all over the mainland searching for a shortcut in the tea process, and eventually came up with a practice that enabled tea makers in southwest China to meet the high demand for pu'er in the city, and that industry is still gigantic today. But not everyone in Hong Kong has money, far from it. Parts of the city such as Mongkok have long been infested by triads, and the city also has a long history of hosting shantytowns, although most weren't as dramatic as the Kowloon walled city, which was the densest settlement in all of history to this day. There is an old Hong Kong practice of using old-school bamboo scaffolding for construction, and this method is still used to build modern skyscrapers. Its night markets are legendary, as are the art scenes of the neighborhoods surrounding the Hollywood Road corridor. Its most famous graffiti artist, known as the King of Kowloon, wrote in his ubiquitous tags the claim that he was local royalty and wanted his land back. And because most of Hong Kong's land is either parkland or literal wilderness, it's easily one of the world's most beautiful cities. One could describe Hong Kong Island as Manhattan in a jungle. Because of its setting, culture, and history, it's just a place people want to be, and is well worth fighting for. Hong Kong is electric and an extremely unique city. You should care about Hong Kong because it's one of the modern world's greatest cities, up there with Paris and NYC, easily. Hong Kong really shouldn't have existed in the first place. If the English hadn't been so evil in the 1800s, the financial district of Central might still be rocks. But it does exist, and the fact is that big changes are being made to Hong Kong today under the Chinese government of Xi Jinping. These changes will turn the place into something very different than what it has been for the past handful of decades. In fact, it already has less foreigners, less financial weight, and a less functional government. But here's to the Hong Kong that was, because, it's been a hell of a city. Love that place. Anyway, this has been The Other Map, and you know where the buttons are. Peace out.